The icy waters of the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Lincoln Cove, Oregon, swallowed the early morning light as it shimmered across the waves in broken, fractured rays. Thomas Granger felt the cold wrap around him like a second skin as he descended into the depths below. His movements were slow, practiced, precise even, as he maneuvered through the quiet underwater world, his dive light cutting a thin beam through the blue-green haze. The only sound was the rhythmic hiss of his oxygen tank and the bubbling exhale that followed every breath. For years, it had been 4 long, soul-breaking years since his daughter, 20-year-old Kayla Granger, had vanished during a morning swim. Each breath he took now was a mix of hope and grief, of routine and desperation. The sea floor beneath him was familiar, almost painfully so. He had traced this stretch of seabed near Breakers Point more times than he could count, searching for anything, any trace, of the daughter he refused to believe was truly gone. His dive light swept across patches of seaweed tangled over rocks and half buried in sand, passing over broken shells and strange shadows that dissolved upon closer inspection. His hand sifted mechanically through the silt, fingers numb both from cold and futility. Nothing. Again. Above him, the modest boat he named the Tide Seeker bobbed with a slow roll of the ocean. Its anchor dropped near the edge of Breakers Point, several miles off the Lincoln Cove shoreline. He had gone out farther than usual this time, urged on by a gut instinct, a feeling deep inside that whispered, today might be different. Still, the familiar ache settled in his chest like it always did when another dive yielded nothing. Nothing but salt, sea, and silence. Lincoln Cove had once felt like home. Now it was merely a place marked by loss. A town of weather-worn docks, clapboard houses clinging to cliffs, and memories that stung like seawater in an open wound. Kayla had been training here for years, swimming every morning from Granger Pier out to Breakers Point, turning at the Red Beacon Buoy, then back, a brutal 4-mile route designed for elite endurance swimmers. She was one of the best, a rising star in open water competition, recently accepted into the U.S. Olympic program. Not yet famous, but those who knew the sport saw what she could become. Thomas had always accompanied her, piloting the Tide Seeker alongside her during training, keeping watch with the devoted caution of a father who'd nearly lost her once as a child to pneumonia and never quite let go of the fear. But Kayla had changed in the year before she vanished. She grew more independent, more insistent. "Dad, I need to do this alone," she had said, firm but kind, brushing wet hair behind her ear. "Wait for me at the dock. I'll be fine." He had agreed, reluctantly. Letting go of that routine, of that protection, was hard. But she was 20 now, a young woman, a professional athlete. She needed space. And so, Thomas had watched her dive in from the pier on that fateful morning, her bright green swim cap bobbing once in the surf before she cut through the water like a torpedo. And then nothing. She never returned. The hours that followed were a blur of panic. He called the Coast Guard, launched his own searches, organized volunteers, drove along the entire shoreline, stopping strangers, crying out her name. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Divers combed the nearby reefs. And yet, not a single piece of evidence surfaced. No body, no gear, no swim cap, no clue, just absence. Thomas, owner of a local diving company and former Navy diver, knew these waters better than almost anyone. He knew how to read the tides, how to navigate underwater caves, how to predict dangerous undercurrents. And even with all that knowledge, he found nothing. Eventually, the police closed the case. Probable drowning, they said. Open water accidents happen, even to professionals. But Thomas didn't believe it. Couldn't. He dove every day, without fail, before work, after work, on holidays, in storms, in stillness. He was searching not just for closure, but for connection, for a sign, for her. Kayla wasn't just his daughter. She was his everything, his only child, the light of his life. And the idea that she was gone without a trace was something he simply couldn't accept. This morning had started like all the others. He prepped his gear at 5 a.m. 8 in silence, drove the familiar road down to Dock 7, set out with coffee in a thermos and a dog-eared notebook where he mapped his previous dives. But something felt different today. A nagging restlessness guided him further past Breaker's Point than he had gone in weeks. He couldn't explain why, only that the pull was too strong to ignore. Now, beneath the surface, his oxygen tank beeped a soft warning. Low air. Reluctantly, Thomas began his ascent, joints aching from the cold and the hours spent underwater. As he broke the surface, blinking against the rising sun, he realized how far he'd strayed. The tide seeker was just a speck in the distance, swaying against the horizon. He swam toward it slowly, fatigue setting into his muscles like iron. Then he saw it. A buoy. Not the red beacon buoy Kayla used for her turning point, but another further out. Older, rusted, hardly maintained. He swam to it, grateful for the chance to rest. He gripped the weathered metal, its barnacle-covered surface rough under his fingers. Then he looked up and saw something. Strapped to the center frame of the buoy was a small, dark object. Curious, he pulled himself up, slipping slightly on the corroded edge. His hand reached out, unfastening the object. A camera, a GoPro to be exact, encased in high-grade waterproof housing, the kind used by deep-sea divers. At first, he didn't think much of it, until he flipped it over and saw the sticker. A faded blue seahorse with 2 letters printed beneath it. KG. Kayla Granger. His breath caught in his throat, his vision blurred. His hands trembled as he stared at the impossible object in his hand. Her camera. The same one he had given her for her 19th birthday. The same one she had carried on every solo swim. Take it, he had said. Record your training. I want to see how you're improving. She had grinned, rolled her eyes, but agreed. And now, after 4 years, 4 silent, empty, torturous years, it was here, waiting. Thomas clutched the GoPro tightly against his chest, his breathing ragged, not from the swim, but from the overwhelming wave of shock that washed over him like the cold ocean itself. For the first time in years, he felt something crack through the numbness. Hope. He lowered the camera into his waterproof bag and kicked back toward the tide seeker with renewed energy, the pain in his shoulders and the sting in his leg forgotten. Above the waves, the sun had fully risen, casting the Pacific in hues of gold and silver, as if the world itself was signaling change. His diving companion, Carlos Ramirez, a fellow diver and longtime friend who had often accompanied him on these fruitless trips, was waiting on deck with a worried look etched into his sun-weathered face. "You went too far this time, Tom," Carlos called out, grabbing his arm and helping him aboard. "You had me scanning the water like crazy. The sun's already high." Thomas climbed aboard, water dripping from his suit in rhythmic splashes against the deck, but he said nothing. His hands trembled as he pulled the waterproof bag to his chest and opened it slowly. Carlos leaned closer. "What's that?" he asked. Thomas wordlessly held up the GoPro. Carlos's eyes widened. "Is that hers?" Thomas nodded. He could barely speak. The lump in his throat choked off the words. They both stared at the device in silence for several seconds, as if expecting it to start speaking on its own. "That's the one, isn't it?" Carlos finally asked, pointing to the faded sticker on the back. "The custom housing you ordered. Kayla's initials." "Yeah," Thomas whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's hers." Carlos exhaled slowly. "You need to get that to the station. Right now." Thomas changed quickly, the adrenaline pushing away the cold. He slid into dry clothes and secured the GoPro in a separate pouch. He glanced at his watch. He still had a couple of hours before he was expected to speak at the Watermen's Foundation event, a fundraiser for youth swim programs and ocean preservation. But that no longer mattered. There was only one thing on his mind now. 20 minutes later, he pulled into the Lincoln Cove Police Department parking lot. The building looked the same as it had 4 years ago, when he'd walked through its doors begging for help, his hands shaking as he showed them the first of hundreds of missing person flyers. Inside, the front desk officer recognized him instantly. "Mr. Granger," she said, rising to her feet. "Detective Langley said you might be coming in. He told us to send you straight to the tech lab." Thomas followed her down a short hallway into a windowless room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and plastic. A man in his mid-30s with tousled blonde hair and wire-rimmed glasses stood from a desk surrounded by monitors and blinking lights. "You must be Mr. Granger," he said, extending his hand. "I'm David Klein, forensic tech." Thomas handed over the camera carefully. "I found it strapped to a buoy off Breakers Point, far beyond Kayla's usual route." Klein accepted it with gentle hands, like a relic, and nodded toward a uniformed officer who stepped inside to witness the transfer. "We'll follow evidence protocol," Klein explained. "Photograph, catalog, then copy all digital data before attempting to view it." Thomas stood behind him, tense, as Klein worked quickly. He snapped photos of the GoPro's condition, then opened the casing and removed the swollen battery and the memory card, inspecting each under magnification. "The battery's shot," he said, "but the card looks good. No corrosion. That's a miracle." He inserted the card into a specialized reader, then connected it to his main workstation. "We'll create a forensic copy and analyze that," he continued, typing commands with practiced precision. As the files began transferring, Thomas gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles turned white. Minutes passed. Then, finally, a video file loaded. Klein opened it. Thomas staggered backward as the screen filled with Kayla's face. She was smiling. Her long hair was wet, plastered to her forehead, and the camera wobbled slightly as she secured it to the buoy. "Testing, testing," she said with a laugh, her voice slightly distorted by the wind, but unmistakably hers. "Perfect spot to capture my training today." Klein pressed pause. "Do you want me to keep going?" "Yes," Thomas breathed. "Please." The footage resumed. Kayla was in the water now, bobbing beside the buoy, speaking into the camera again. "Day 43 of Olympic prep," she said, pushing damp strands from her eyes. "Coach says I'm stronger, but I'm still worried about my flip turns. I don't know. I keep thinking, what if I'm just not good enough?" Thomas's throat tightened. She had never expressed that to him. Not once. "Why would you leave that camera out here?" he asked aloud. Then Kayla turned suddenly, her expression surprised. "Oh, hey there," she said, glancing off camera. A young man swam into frame. His features were hard to make out due to water droplets on the lens and the angle of the shot. Only the top of his head, wet hair, and his eyes were clearly visible. "Hey," he said, his tone casual. "Didn't think I'd see anyone else out this far." "I'm training," Kayla replied. "Olympic team." "Impressive," the man said. "You won a race?" Kayla grinned. "Where to?" He pointed. "Outcropping over there." "You're on," she said, adjusting her goggles. The two disappeared from the camera's view. The footage continued, recording the empty waves for nearly half an hour. Then something else entered frame. A boat. A large, sleek vessel barely captured on the edge of the wide-angle lens. The camera picked up only the lower hull. But there, just visible, was a logo. Klein paused the playback. "Let's enhance that." He zoomed in and processed the image. The resolution was poor, but the logo came into focus enough to reveal a stylized wave overlaid with lettering. Pacific Crest Marine. Thomas's heart skipped. "That's a local company," he said. "They sponsor athletes. I saw one of their boats at the marina this morning." "We can dig deeper," Klein said. "I'll forward this to Detective Langley." He continued scrubbing through the footage. Kayla never returned to the buoy. The rest of the video was empty ocean until the camera died. Thomas wiped his face with both hands. "Can you go back to the guy?" "The swimmer." Klein rewound. They watched again. He took notes on hair color, age approximation, and clothing. "I'll try to ID him," Klein said. "And that boat?" Thomas nodded slowly. His chest felt tight. The questions were piling up, but one thing was clear. Something happened to Kayla. And this video, this moment captured by pure chance, was the first real clue in 4 years. Thomas left the police station with a GoPro safely in evidence, but something inside him had already changed. After 4 years of silence, the discovery of Kayla's voice, her smile, her face, recorded on that buoy, was like a crack of thunder in a long drought. He drove in silence, the roads of Lincoln Cove flying past the windows of his truck, though he barely registered them. His mind played the footage over and over again, each frame etched into his thoughts. The stranger in the water, the sudden appearance of the boat, the logo, Pacific Crest Marine. The name echoed in his head as he pulled into the parking lot of the Lincoln Cove Aquatic Center. The event he was meant to attend, a charity lunch for former Olympic hopefuls and water safety advocates, was already in full swing. Olympic banners flapped gently in the breeze outside the building, and the smell of pool chlorine mixed with the scent of catered food and floral arrangements. Volunteers in branded T-shirts moved between tables, smiling and chatting with guests. Thomas stepped out of his car and adjusted his jacket, the weight of what he had just experienced still heavy on his shoulders. Inside the hall, an organizer spotted him immediately. "Mr. Granger." "You're here," she said with a wide smile, hurrying toward him. "We were starting to worry." "Sorry," Thomas replied. "Something came up." She didn't press further, only nodded and gestured toward a backstage area. "You're up in about 15 minutes. Just enough time for a little powder and prep." He followed her behind the curtain where a makeup artist lightly dabbed his forehead and adjusted his collar under the stage lights. The whole time, his fingers kept twitching, as if they longed to be typing, sending messages, researching that boat company, calling Detective Langley again. 5 minutes, the organizer said, handing him a small bottle of water. Thomas took it and nodded, then stepped out onto the stage. Polite applause rose from the crowd, former coaches, athletes, swim enthusiasts, and supporters of the Aquatic Center. Everyone here had heard of Kayla's disappearance. It had been a local tragedy, one that faded from national headlines, but never from this town's collective memory. He cleared his throat and began speaking about water safety, about training resilience, about mentoring the next generation of swimmers. But in truth, his mind was elsewhere. On Kayla, on that camera, on the man in the water. As the applause faded and he stepped off stage, Thomas was immediately approached by 2 old friends, Tom Sanders and Mike Doyle, former teammates from his own swim team days. "Great speech, Tom," Sanders said, clapping him on the back. "You always knew how to hold a crowd." "Thanks," Thomas said, accepting a glass of water. He hesitated only a moment before speaking again. "Listen, I need to tell you something." He lowered his voice and explained what had happened that morning. The dive, the GoPro, the footage, the logo on the boat. He even showed them the screenshot Klein had enhanced of the boat's logo. Sanders leaned in to examine the image. "That's Pacific Crest Marine, all right," he said. "They've been around about 5 or 6 years now. New money, but they've made a big splash sponsoring athletes. Real PR heavy. You know anything else about them? Thomas asked. Just that they've been throwing gear and boats at local programs, Doyle replied. They've got a booth here, actually. Right over there. He gestured toward the far side of the room. Thomas turned to look, and there it was. A sleek, professional display with banners bearing the Pacific Crest Marine logo, and two men in branded polo shirts chatting with guests. I need to talk to them, Thomas said, already moving across the room. His friends gave each other uneasy looks, but didn't stop him. As he approached the booth, the two men looked up. One was middle-aged, with graying hair and a sharp jawline. The other was younger, fit, and smiled easily. Good afternoon, the older man greeted him. Looking for boating equipment? Actually, Thomas said, keeping his tone calm, I'm more interested in your company. I understand you sponsor athletes. We do, the younger man said proudly. It's part of our outreach. Equipment, transportation, even training stipends for up-and-coming talent. That's generous, Thomas replied, then took a small risk. Do either of you know someone named Martin associated with your company? The reaction was immediate. Both men froze, their smiles faltering. The younger one glanced at the older. Martin, the older man repeated. There are probably a few Martins in our database. Any last name? Thomas shook his head. No, just Martin. He was out near Breakers Point about 4 years ago in one of your boats. The men exchanged another quick look. I'm not sure about that vessel, the younger one said, voice uncertain. We have a large fleet. If you want to know more about the boats, you'd have to contact our marina staff, the older man added quickly. We're just here for promotion. Of course, Thomas said, but his instincts flared. The way they were suddenly rigid, the way their eyes avoided his. He thanked them and walked away, but instead of returning to his table, he glanced back. The younger man had stepped away, phone to his ear, pacing nervously. Moments later, both began hurriedly packing up their booth. Thomas didn't hesitate. He turned toward the exit, slipping away from the hall. The organizer intercepted him halfway. Mr. Granger, we need you for the closing remarks in 20 minutes. I'm sorry, he said, his tone urgent. There's a family emergency. I need to go. He exited the building and reached the parking lot just in time to see the Pacific Crest Marine van pulling out. He jumped into his truck and followed at a careful distance, heart pounding. The van took a winding path through Lincoln Cove, avoiding the main harbor route. Instead, it veered off the coastal highway, heading north along the rugged cliffs. Thomas's phone buzzed. It was Detective Langley. Mr. Granger, Langley said. We reviewed the footage. I've got a team looking into Pacific Crest Marine. The logo matches. We're heading to their registered marina now. I'm ahead of you, Thomas said. I followed 2 of their guys from the event. They're not heading to the main harbor. They're going up the coastal road, past the North Headland. Send me your location, Langley instructed. But be careful. Don't confront them. Just track and report. Understood, Thomas replied. But as he sped up to keep sight of the van turning down an unmarked gravel road, he realized he had forgotten to share his GPS pin. The road was unfamiliar, lined with pine trees and brush, sloping downward toward the coast. Finally, the van stopped at what looked like an old, abandoned marina, crumbling docks, rusted metal sheds, and silence. Thomas parked behind a grove of trees and stepped out quietly, using brush and terrain for cover. From his vantage point, he watched the 2 men unload boxes and meet with several others already waiting at the dock. Just as he moved in for a closer look, a sleek crossover boat arrived, docking with eerie precision. 3 more men disembarked, one shouting orders. Thomas ducked behind an old tarp-covered boat as 2 of the men began pacing the perimeter. Suddenly, another vehicle pulled in. Car doors slammed. Then voices. Female voices. And then fear. Thomas stayed crouched behind the tarp-covered pile of boat parts, his heart pounding as he strained to hear the conversation happening on the dock just 20 feet away. One of the newcomers, a tall man with a trimmed beard and a military-style jacket, was barking orders to the group. "We need to move now," the man snapped. "The boss is waiting on the yacht, and he's furious. Get those crates loaded. Patrol the perimeter. No mistakes this time." His voice was sharp, commanding, clearly used to being obeyed without question. Thomas dared to shift his weight slightly, trying to see more. One of the dockhands had begun pacing toward his position, scanning the surroundings with a flashlight and holding a walkie-talkie to his mouth. Thomas held his breath, staying as still as stone. The man stopped just a few feet away, then turned back toward the dock, muttering something into his radio. Another voice, this time female, cut through the quiet. "Please," she whispered. "You said this would be the last time. We've done everything you asked." Her tone was hushed but filled with terror. "Shut up and move," came the gruff reply. "Get in the boat. Head down. Don't speak." Thomas felt cold all over, not from the ocean breeze, but from the realization of what he was witnessing. Human trafficking. Kidnapped women. Possibly Kayla among them. The boat's engine started up again, quiet but urgent. He watched as shadows moved across the dock, figures being led toward the crossover boat. He counted at least 3 women, heads bowed, arms tightly held. One of them stumbled, and the man holding her yanked her arm violently to keep her upright. Thomas clenched his fists, every instinct screaming to intervene, but he knew it would be suicide without backup. From his position, he could hear 2 men speaking near the van. "How did this happen?" one said. "They've been off the radar for years." "I don't know," the other replied. But the cops started sniffing around. Someone must have leaked something. Or maybe one of the girls left a trace. Either way, Grant is losing it. He said, "If we don't get this cleaned up fast, we'll end up like those other guys last year, at the bottom of the channel. Let's just finish and disappear." Thomas recognized the name instantly, Grant. A name associated with Pacific Crest Marine, often mentioned as a quiet but powerful figure. As the men finished loading and the boat started to pull away, Thomas slipped back through the trees, his breath shallow and quick. He needed to call Langley, now. He pulled out his phone and quickly dialed. "Where are you?" Langley asked immediately. "I never got your location." "I'm at an abandoned marina about 10 miles north of Lincoln Cove," Thomas whispered. "Just beyond the North Headland, down an unmarked road. I witnessed what I believe is a human trafficking operation connected to Pacific Crest Marine. They're moving the women by boat. I think my daughter might be one of them." Langley's voice sharpened. "We'll dispatch units to your location immediately." "No," Thomas cut in. "They're gone. They just left the marina on a crossover boat. They said they're headed to a yacht offshore. You need to intercept that boat. I'm heading back to the main harbor. Meet me there with whatever marine units you can gather." There was a pause. "All right," Langley said. "We'll coordinate with the harbor patrol and meet you at the marina in 20 minutes. "Hurry," Thomas said. "If they disappear into those islands, we may never find them again." He ended the call and sprinted back to his truck. As he pulled out of the gravel lot, Thomas's mind raced. Kayla was alive, or at least had been recently. The thought sent a jolt of hope through him, so intense it bordered on pain. He drove recklessly down the winding road back to the main marina. When he arrived, red and blue lights flashed in the lot. Langley stood with 4 officers, several members of the Coast Guard, and 2 harbor patrol teams. 2 police boats and a larger Coast Guard vessel were being fueled and prepped. "Jack," Langley called out as Thomas ran up. "We've got a chopper en route. They're moving them to a yacht." Thomas reported breathlessly. That's what I heard. A big vessel anchored off the Channel Islands. Langley nodded grimly. Harbor Patrol tracked the crossover boat on coastal surveillance. It's about 7 miles offshore, heading southeast. Fast. We're predicting they're making for the coves near Harbor Island. There are caves there, Thomas said. Dozens of them. If they get into the underwater system, you'll never find them without help. Which is why you're coming with us, Langley replied. But you stay behind the tactical team. Clear. Thomas nodded, grabbing a spare wetsuit and gear from the patrol shed. They launched minutes later, cutting through the water like torpedoes. The helicopter passed overhead, rotors thundering. Langley coordinated with all units via radio. Air 1, report when visual is confirmed. Air 1 has the yacht in sight, came the response. 12 miles southeast. Crossover boat is docking with them now. People are being transferred aboard. Thomas grabbed binoculars and scanned the horizon. There, barely visible, was the sleek white yacht. Figures moved across the deck. 3 women, flanked by men in dark clothing. I see them, Thomas said. They're taking the women below deck. All units maintain speed, Langley ordered. No engagement until we're close. We want to catch them before they bolt. Tactical officers loaded their gear. Divers prepared with underwater propulsion units and flash grenades. Air 1 reports movement on the yacht. The radio cracked again. They've spotted us. The yacht is moving, heading south at speed. They're running, Langley confirmed. We intercept now. The boats surged forward. Thomas watched through binoculars as the crossover boat detached and turned toward them. 2 armed men aboard the crossover, he reported. They're trying to cut us off. Hold position, Langley said. Tactical, prepare for contact. The first shots rang out, warning rounds from the helicopter, splashing just ahead of the crossover. The 2 armed men took cover, returning fire. Do not hit the divers or oxygen tanks, Thomas shouted. Those girls have gear on. On the yacht, more figures emerged. The women were being rushed to the stern, dressed in wetsuits, carrying gear. They're putting them in the water, Thomas said, horror rising. They're going for the caves. Once they disappear down there, he didn't finish the sentence. Langley issued rapid commands. Diverse, deploy now. All boats maintain pursuit. One of the tactical divers handed Thomas a mask. Stay on deck, Langley warned. You're not cleared for water operations. I know those caves, Thomas snapped. If Kayla's down there, I'm not sitting this out. Langley tried to argue, but gunfire from the crossover boat forced them both to duck. In the chaos, Thomas made his move. He grabbed a spare mask, flippers, and a handheld breather. It wasn't a full setup, but it would have to do. While the officers returned fire and the helicopter provided cover, Thomas slipped into the cold, dark water, every stroke a silent vow. The frigid water closed over Thomas like a heavy shroud, swallowing him whole as he kicked hard and dove beneath the surface. The pain in his thigh, the one that had taken a bullet minutes ago, pulsed with every stroke, but he pushed through it, adrenaline numbing his senses. He had no oxygen tank, just a handheld breather and decades of diving experience to keep him moving. He swam with practiced strokes, eyes scanning the murky water ahead, heart thundering in his ears as he approached the chaos unraveling beneath the waves. An underwater battlefield lit only by the glow of dive lights and glints of metal. 20 to 30 feet below the surface, the water churned with movement. The police divers had intercepted the kidnappers. What should have been a clean extraction was devolving into a violent struggle. The kidnappers, armed with spear guns and tethered by handcuffs to the women they were trying to disappear with, were fighting back with desperation and fury. Thomas saw one of the divers lock arms with a masked man, wrestling for control of a weapon, the line from the harpoon stretching between them like a deadly fuse. Another officer tried to pry apart a pair still joined by cuffs, but the resistance was fierce. And then Thomas saw her. Through the flicker of dive beams, through clouds of disturbed sand and the occasional flash of steel, he saw her, Kayla. She was still bound to a man nearly twice her size, her arms struggling to break free as he tried to steer her toward a rocky outcrop at the ocean floor. Her eyes were wide with panic, her limbs thrashing. The kidnapper was trying to reach the entrance to an underwater cave. Thomas recognized the silhouette of the cave mouth immediately. He had mapped it years ago. A dark, narrow shaft that could lead for miles beneath the island. He needed air, but there was no time. Surfacing now meant losing her forever. He kicked harder, surging forward, and as he drew close, the kidnapper noticed him. The man raised his spear gun, aiming it directly at Thomas's chest. In that frozen second, Thomas braced himself, but another diver appeared from above, grabbing the attacker's wrist just as he fired. The spear veered left, slicing through the water a breath away from Thomas's ribs. With a final push, Thomas reached them. He yanked the kidnapper's dive regulator from his mouth. The man thrashed, panicking, and loosened his grip on Kayla just long enough. The officer beside Thomas used the moment to strike. He jammed a knife into the chain of the cuffs, snapping the connection. Kayla was free. Thomas grabbed her wrist and pulled her close. Her eyes locked with his. Recognition dawned. Her mouth opened in a scream that only made bubbles. He saw it in her face. Dad. Even under 20 feet of ocean, even in the terror of this impossible moment, she knew it was him. He wrapped an arm around her, guiding her away as the diver engaged the flailing kidnapper. Together, father and daughter kicked toward the surface, rising through shafts of light and salt and chaos. But the pain in Thomas's leg was getting worse. Blood clouded the water behind them. He kicked harder, but his muscles were failing. Kayla noticed. Her face turned panicked again as she wrapped one arm around his chest and kicked for both of them. Thomas felt his consciousness slipping, darkness creeping in at the edges of his vision. The last thing he saw before blacking out was her face, older, thinner, harder than he remembered, but alive, beautiful, fighting for him now, just as he had fought for her all these years. He awoke to the sound of beeping monitors and the soft rock of a boat. He blinked up at a white ceiling, fluorescent lights glaring down at him. The smell of antiseptic burned his nose. A medic hovered over him, applying pressure to his bandaged thigh. "He's conscious," she called out. "Mr. Granger, try not to move. You've lost a lot of blood." He tried anyway. "Kayla," he croaked. "Where's my daughter?" "Dad." Her voice broke through the noise, like sunlight piercing storm clouds. He turned his head, and there she was. Kayla sat beside him on the stretcher, still in her wetsuit, wrapped in a thermal blanket. Tears streaked down her face. She looked different, older, stronger, worn in ways number 21-year-old should be, but her eyes were the same. She gripped his hand and held it against her cheek. "You found me," she whispered. "After all this time, you actually found me." He tried to smile but grimaced instead, the pain catching up to him. "You're safe now," he said. A medic stepped between them gently. "We have to stabilize him. He's lost a lot of blood. We'll be arriving at the harbor in less than 10 minutes. He needs surgery immediately." Another medic approached Kayla and the two other rescued women, Anna and Lily. "We need to check all of you for injuries," she said softly. "You've been through a serious trauma." One of the women, the blonde one, Anna, looked up with glassy eyes. "Are they all gone?" she asked. "The men who kept us?" A nearby officer nodded. "We neutralized the threat. 2 kidnappers from the crossover were killed in the firefight. The yacht captain and 3 others, including the son, are in custody. The third woman, Lily, thin and pale, began sobbing quietly. Detective Langley appeared beside the medic, his uniform soaked from the mission, but his expression calm. "Mr. Granger," he said, "you did it. You're one hell of a stubborn man. That was either brave or completely insane." Thomas managed a faint smile. "Did we get them all?" "We think so." Grant Whitmore, the owner of Pacific Crest Marine, was killed during the confrontation on the yacht. His son, Martin, is alive and under arrest. We're already coordinating with federal agencies. It looks like they've been targeting female athletes for years. He said he could make her famous, Thomas muttered. Langley nodded grimly. "In exchange for submission, we found files, sponsorship records, photos. This could go national, maybe international. But for now, our priority is recovery." Langley turned to Kayla. "I know this is difficult," he said gently, "but can you tell us anything about what happened to you?" "Just the basics. We'll take full statements later." Kayla looked at her father again. He nodded. She took a breath. "It started at the buoy," she said. "Martin swam up, said he used to compete. We raced to the outcropping. On the way back, he said his boat was nearby and offered me a ride." Her voice trembled. "I was tired. It sounded harmless." She paused, wiping a tear. "But they didn't take me back to shore. They took me to their estate," she continued. "They drugged me. When I woke up, I was locked in a room with Anna and Lily. Grant told us he had connections, Olympic scouts, coaches, media outlets. Said he could make us stars if we cooperated. When we resisted, he threatened our families. He knew everything about you, Dad. Said if I didn't obey, you'd suffer. Your company would be ruined. Your house would burn. And eventually you'd drown." Thomas closed his eyes, fury and guilt boiling inside him. Kayla took a deep breath. "So I stopped fighting, at least on the outside. We trained every day, always watched, always monitored. We were kept fit, presentable. He said if we didn't look like athletes, we weren't worth anything. 2 girls tried to escape. We never saw them again." Her voice cracked. "They said they were moving us because someone talked. I think Martin did. He hated his father. I think he wanted out too." Langley nodded slowly. "We'll get full debriefings later. Right now you all need rest." The boat rocked gently as it neared the harbor. Ambulances waited, lights flashing. Thomas squeezed Kayla's hand one more time before a medic moved him. "I should have escaped," she whispered as they wheeled him away. "I should have been stronger." "You survived," Thomas whispered back. "That's enough." She smiled through her tears. "You never gave up, not for a second." And as the gurney lifted him toward the ambulance, he clutched that truth with everything he had. As the ambulance sped through the coastal roads toward Lincoln Cove Regional Hospital, sirens wailing softly in the early dawn, Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind replaying everything in disjointed flashes. The water, Kayla's face, the GoPro, the men on the dock, the yacht vanishing into the horizon. Somewhere between waking and dreaming, he heard voices, paramedics updating vitals, radio chatter from police units, the steady beep of the heart monitor echoing his own racing pulse. Every time he stirred, he asked the same question, "Where's Kayla?" And each time someone answered, "She's safe. She's right behind you." At the hospital, the gurney wheeled through sterile halls bathed in fluorescent light, and Thomas finally let go of his fight against the pain. Doctors surrounded him, examining the gunshot wound in his thigh, cutting away fabric, preparing for surgery. The last thing he saw before being sedated was Kayla at the end of the corridor, standing in oversized clothes and hospital slippers, flanked by detectives and nurses, her eyes locked on his. She lifted her hand in a trembling wave. "I'll be here, Dad," she said, "when you wake up." Then the lights blurred into white, and everything went silent. Meanwhile, across town, at the Lincoln Cove Police Precinct, Martin Whitmore sat alone in an interrogation room. His left arm was bandaged from the wound inflicted by Thomas's misfired spear. His right hand was cuffed to the metal table. He stared down at a paper cup of untouched water, his expression blank, bloodshot eyes rimmed with red. A one-way mirror reflected his hunched frame back at him, shaking, disheveled, and defeated. On the other side of the glass, Detective Langley stood with two FBI agents who had arrived overnight. The investigation had escalated quickly, and now it was no longer a local case, it was national. "Is he ready to talk?" one of the agents asked. Langley nodded. "He's been rambling since he got here. Guilt, fear, and something else. I think he's trying to separate himself from his father. Might be our best shot at the full story." They entered the room together. Martin didn't look up until Langley dropped a folder onto the table in front of him. Photographs of the girls, the yacht, the marina, the equipment. "You know what this is," Langley said quietly. "Let's talk about Grant." Martin flinched at the name. "He's dead," he said flatly. "I saw it. I watched him fall." "You didn't pull the trigger," Langley said. "But you knew what he was doing. You helped him." Martin laughed bitterly. "Helped? I wasn't even allowed near them. You think I like this?" He leaned forward, eyes blazing. "I wanted out years ago. I told him. He said if I ever betrayed him, he'd make me disappear like he did with others." "Others?" one of the agents prompted. Martin nodded slowly. "Two girls tried to run. They never made it past the second cove. And there was a trainer once, someone who figured out what he was doing. He vanished, too." Langley opened the folder again and pulled out a printout. "This is your father's shell company structure. Offshore accounts, false sponsorships, cash transactions. You're listed on several of these documents. Care to explain?" Martin's voice was hollow. "He used me. I was the smiling face for investors. The former college swimmer. The golden son. But I never touched the money. I never touched the girls." He looked up. "Except her. Kayla." The room went still. "You knew her?" Langley asked. "From the day she arrived. She fought more than the others. Asked more questions. She wasn't afraid, not like the rest." "So why help your father?" Langley pressed. Martin shook his head. "Because he said if I didn't, he'd hurt her father. He knew everything about the guy, his routines, his boat, even what time he usually launched from the pier. He said if Kayla didn't cooperate, Thomas Granger would have a fatal accident." Martin's hand trembled as he reached for the water cup but didn't drink. "So I shut up. I kept smiling. I played along. I told myself it was just until I figured out how to stop him." "But you didn't stop him," Langley said. "Not until today." Martin's voice cracked. "I tried. I swear. When Kayla left her GoPro at the buoy, I told one of the newer guys not to retrieve it. I knew someone would find it eventually. I thought maybe her dad would come across it. He's obsessed. I've seen him out there 100 times, diving in circles. I thought it might lead him to us." Langley exchanged a glance with the FBI agents. One of them stepped forward. "So you're saying you intentionally left the camera behind to trigger an investigation?" "Yes," Martin said. "It was the only thing I could think of." "And the final move to the yacht?" Langley asked. "That was your father panicking?" Martin nodded. He knew something was coming. One of the girls, Lily, I think, was acting strange. Said she had a plan. I think she'd hidden a note or something. He didn't want to risk it. So he ordered us to relocate everyone to a new holding facility in Mexico. That's what the yacht was for." The FBI agent flipped to the last page in the file. You're looking at serious charges, Martin. Decades in prison. But if you cooperate, if your testimony leads to uncovering the rest of this network, I'll cooperate," Martin said immediately. "Whatever you need. Just tell Kayla I'm sorry." He bowed his head. "I never wanted this." Langley closed the folder. "We'll be in touch." Outside the room, the agents began organizing a wider operation: search warrants, financial freezes, interagency contacts. The case was bigger than anyone had guessed. And it had all started with a single GoPro tied to a forgotten buoy. Back at the hospital, Kayla sat at her father's bedside. Thomas stirred slowly, groaning as the medication wore off. His leg was heavily bandaged, suspended slightly above the mattress. Machines beeped in slow, steady rhythm beside him. He blinked up at her, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Still here?" "Always," she said, squeezing his hand. "You saved me." He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner." "You found me," she repeated firmly. "That's what matters." Outside the window, morning light was breaking across the Pacific. The storm had passed. The tide had turned. While Thomas recovered in the hospital and the FBI expanded their investigation on land, a second team, composed of federal agents, Coast Guard officers, and Marine units, prepared for the offshore operation. Even with Grant Whitmore dead and several of his key operatives in custody, there were still pieces of the network unaccounted for. Interrogations of surviving crew members from the yacht revealed that another transfer had been planned. A second vessel, registered under a shell company tied to Pacific Crest Marine, was already en route to international waters. If they didn't act fast, the last remaining captives and any trace of physical evidence could vanish for good. The FBI deployed 2 high-speed intercept boats and a reconnaissance helicopter. Lieutenant Michelle Danner, a decorated naval strategist turned federal field commander, was placed in charge of the mission. She stood on the deck of the lead vessel, wind tearing at her jacket, eyes fixed on the horizon. "We've got a 20-minute lead time," she told her team, studying the last coordinates from a satellite ping. "The second vessel is a retrofitted cargo yacht named Linares. No flags, no transponder, but moving fast, likely headed toward the open gap past Harbor Island." A junior analyst passed her a tablet with updated tracking data. Danner reviewed the images. Infrared signatures from a drone showed the faint outline of a ship about 15 miles offshore. "They're trying to ghost through the radar net," she muttered. "But we've got eyes." She turned to her crew. "All units, prepare for full intercept. Engage only on command. We want survivors." The 2 boats roared forward, slicing through the morning swells with precision. Overhead, the drone switched to live feed, transmitting real-time video of the fleeing vessel. Danner picked up the radio. "Helix 1, visual confirmed. We are closing in. Intercept in less than 10 minutes." From above, the Lunaris appeared deceptively quiet. No movement on deck, no crew in sight. But Danner wasn't fooled. "They're hiding," she said, "which means they're expecting us." At her signal, sharpshooters positioned themselves at the boat's bow, while tactical divers prepared to enter from beneath. As the boats closed in, the radio crackled again. "We've got a launch," came a voice from the second intercept boat. Smaller craft leaving the yacht. High speed. "That's their escape plan," Danner snapped. "Target the small craft. Contain the yacht. Divers go." Like shadows, the dive team disappeared into the water, aiming for the hull of the Linares, where they would attach magnetic boarding clamps. Above the surface, the smaller escape boat, barely more than a speedboat, darted away in a zigzag pattern. Coast Guard units peeled off to pursue. Danner stayed focused on the larger prize. "Helix 1, hold visual," she ordered. "If anyone jumps overboard, I want eyes on them." From the drone feed, she saw a sudden figure appear on deck, a man in black, carrying a duffel. He looked around once, then hurled the bag into the ocean. "They're dumping evidence." Danner shouted, "Mark that location. Divers will retrieve it later." Moments later, another figure bolted from below deck, this one shorter, limping, clutching something wrapped in plastic. "Sniper 1, she called. "Can you disable that target?" "Negative," came the reply. "No clear shot. Risk of hitting the hull." "Then we take him alive," she said. "Seal the perimeter." On cue, a burst of compressed air signaled the divers' breach. One by one, they boarded the Lunaris, fanning out silently across the lower levels. Muffled thuds and short shouts echoed from the hull. Danner watched from the boat's bridge, her fists clenched, as the moments ticked by. "Diverse report. 2 hostiles detained, 2 more resisting," said the comms officer. "No sign of captives yet." "Tell them to search the cargo bay," Danner responded. 5 minutes passed. Then a new voice broke through the radio, one of the divers. "Commander, we found them." "How many?" 4. "All women. Alive. Bound but unharmed." Danner let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Secure them. Begin evacuation. Prep the med bay." Overhead, the helicopter dipped lower, providing cover as the intercept boats drew alongside the yacht. The tactical team guided the rescued women onto stretchers and blankets. One woman wept silently. Another clung to a medic. All bore signs of exhaustion and trauma, but all were alive. "Who are you?" one whispered to the agent beside her. "Rescue," he replied simply. "You're safe now." As the sun broke fully over the water, painting the Pacific in gold and sapphire, the mission wrapped. The Lunaris was commandeered. The escape boat, after a tense chase, was disabled and the passengers taken into custody. Back on shore, Thomas received the update as he lay in his hospital bed, Kayla dozing beside him. Langley entered the room, his face stern but satisfied. "They got them," he said. "All of them. The last boat. The last girls. They're safe." Thomas looked up slowly, emotions fighting for space in his weary face. "Are you sure it's over?" Langley hesitated. "This chapter?" "Yes. But the investigation's just beginning." He pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. "We've got international players involved. Some of these shell companies trace back to private schools, sports academies, even investment firms. This wasn't just one sick man and his son. It's a system. Whitmore was just a hub." Thomas looked at Kayla, her face peaceful for the first time in years. "Then burn the system down." Langley nodded. "We intend to." As he left the room, Thomas looked out the window toward the harbor. The water was calm now, quiet, but beneath it, he knew, were still secrets waiting to be dragged into the light. And he would be ready. Martin Whitmore sat in a reinforced holding cell at the Federal Detention Center in Portland, Oregon, staring at the blank gray wall across from him as if waiting for it to speak. It had been 3 days since the yacht raid, 3 days since his father had died before his eyes, and 3 days since his name had exploded across national headlines as the accomplice to one of the most twisted athlete exploitation rings in modern history. His face had appeared on every major news outlet, always beside words like trafficking, elite sports abuse, and Olympic scandal. But Martin didn't flinch anymore. He barely blinked. The room was cold, deliberately so, and he wore the standard orange jumpsuit issued to federal detainees. His left shoulder throbbed where the spear from Thomas Granger's misfired shot had embedded itself, now surgically removed, but leaving behind a dull ache. A lawyer had been assigned to him, but Martin refused to speak to anyone. That changed when a request came through from the FBI. A high-ranking profiler had arrived, someone with a specialty in criminal psychology, hoping to get inside the mind of the son who had lived in the shadows of his father's monstrous empire. Dr. Evelyn Sharp was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed and steady-voiced, with a calm presence cultivated over decades of extracting truth from difficult subjects. She entered the cell without a briefcase, without notes, and without guards. Just her voice recorder and a bottle of water. Martin looked up when she walked in, but said nothing. She sat across from him and waited. The silence stretched long between them. Finally, she spoke. "I'm not here to interrogate you, Martin. I'm here to help the people who suffered, and to understand how it happened, so we can prevent it from happening again." He let out a bitter laugh. "Understanding it won't stop it. People like my father, they always find new ways." "Maybe," she said, "but we try anyway, because doing nothing makes us just like him." Martin's eyes flashed. "I was nothing like him." "Then tell me who you were," she said softly. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I was the mistake," he finally said. "The one he couldn't mold. I wasn't strong enough, smart enough, ruthless enough. So he used me, put my name on companies, dragged me into sponsorship meetings, made me smile next to the same girls he was grooming." Dr. Sharp didn't interrupt. She just listened. "He wanted control," Martin continued. "That's what it was all about. Controlling their futures, their bodies, their stories. And when one girl got too difficult, he'd move her, or trade her, like some pawn on a board. And I watched it happen." His voice cracked. "I watched it happen, and I didn't stop it." "You tried," Sharp said, "with the camera." "It wasn't enough," Martin said bitterly. "It was a coward's way of telling the truth. I should have spoken up years ago, but I was afraid." "Of your father?" she asked. Martin shook his head. "Of being nothing." He leaned back, pressing his bandaged shoulder against the wall. He said I'd never amount to anything on my own. And I believed him. So I followed orders. I helped build a prison for people who just wanted to swim, just wanted to be great. He closed his eyes. Kayla was different. She was stronger. She never stopped fighting. "Did you love her?" Dr. Sharp asked. Martin didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "I don't know what love is, but I think I wanted to." Outside the detention center, the nation was reeling. In the days since the story broke, dozens of victims came forward, some who had escaped the program years ago, but never felt safe speaking out until now. Others were still being identified from documents recovered on the Linares. Photos, training records, forged contracts. Pacific Crest Marine, once praised as a shining sponsor of Olympic dreams, had become synonymous with coercion, cover-ups, and control. The U.S. Olympic Committee issued statements of horror and denial. Sponsors pulled their funding. Investigations opened into related clubs and training camps across multiple states. At Lincoln Cove Regional Hospital, Kayla watched it all unfold from the quiet of her recovery room. She sat in a chair by the window, knees pulled to her chest, TV muted as images of her own face cycled through news stories. Reporters praised her bravery. Survivors called her a hero. But Kayla didn't feel like one. "They're calling me the girl who brought the ring down," she said softly to her therapist, a woman named Rochelle who visited each morning. "But I didn't do anything. I just forgot my camera." Rochelle leaned forward. "Sometimes the smallest mistake becomes the most important act." Kayla smiled faintly, then looked out the window again. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I've spent 4 years surviving someone else's story." "Then it's time to write your own," Rochelle said. "And it starts with telling it when you're ready." Down the hall, Thomas was up and walking slowly with a cane. The doctors said he was healing faster than expected. Every step was painful, but every step was earned. He stopped by Kayla's door and knocked gently. She looked up, then smiled. "You're walking." "Barely," he said with a smirk. "But I've got places to be." She helped him to the chair beside her window. For a long time, they sat in silence, watching the sun sink over the Pacific. "What happens now?" Kayla finally asked. Thomas looked at her. "Whatever you want. If you want to tell your story, I'll be beside you. If you want to vanish from all this, I'll find a way to make that happen too. The world doesn't get to own you." She nodded slowly. "I think I want to start with one thing." "What's that?" he asked. She turned from the window and looked at him directly. "I want to see him." Thomas's face hardened. "Martin." She nodded. "I need to know why he didn't help sooner. I need to hear him say it." "You don't owe him anything," Thomas said gently. "I know," she said, "but I owe it to myself." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll arrange it. On your terms." That night, while the world watched the headlines, while investigations broadened, and while survivors took their first breaths of freedom, Kayla Granger prepared to face the man who had stood beside her captor, neither fully villain nor fully victim. And in that meeting, she hoped to reclaim one final piece of herself. The Federal Detention Center was a fortress of concrete and steel, set on the outskirts of Portland, where fog hung low over razor wire and security lights never blinked. Kayla arrived just after noon, accompanied by a federal agent and a trauma counselor, though she had insisted on walking in by herself. She wore plain clothes, black jeans, a gray hoodie, and had tied her hair back in a no-nonsense braid that reminded Thomas of how she used to get ready for swim meets. "She's ready," the counselor told the agent, though her eyes flickered with quiet concern. "But this may be harder than she expects." They led her down a long corridor lined with unmarked doors and humming surveillance cameras. She had to surrender her phone, her ID, even the bracelet she'd worn since her 18th birthday, a gift from her father she hadn't taken off since returning home. The room was small, sterile, furnished only with 2 chairs and a bolted-down table. A thick glass window looked in from one side, behind which a team of agents would be watching. A camera in the ceiling tilted quietly, recording every moment. 10 minutes, the guard said. "You can leave at any time." Kayla nodded and stepped inside. Martin was already seated, one wrist cuffed to the table, the bandage on his shoulder clearly visible beneath the loose collar of his jumpsuit. His eyes snapped up when she entered, and for a moment both froze. Kayla took a slow breath, walked to the chair across from him, and sat without speaking. She didn't look away. Neither did he. The silence stretched until Martin finally spoke. "I didn't think you'd come." Kayla's voice was calm. "I need to know why." Martin's fingers twitched on the table. "Why I didn't help you. Or why I stood there for 4 years and did nothing." "Both," she said. Martin nodded slowly. "I guess I deserve that." He looked down at his hands, then back up at her. "I was scared. That's the truth. Scared of him. Scared of what he'd do to me, or to you, or to your father. I watched him destroy people for less than what I was thinking about doing." Kayla's face didn't change. "You still let it happen. Every day. You watched him. Watched us. You ate meals while we trained in the water like machines. You smiled while we cried behind locked doors." "I know," he whispered. "I know exactly what I did." "No," she said, leaning forward slightly. "You don't. You don't know what it felt like to count the seconds between footsteps. To wonder if today would be the day he stopped pretending to be civil. You don't know what it's like to have your dreams turned into shackles." Martin's throat worked as he tried to swallow. "I tried to leave once. Packed a bag. I made it to the marina. But he found me before I got on the boat. Broke 2 of my ribs. Told me the next time it'd be my eyes. Said he'd blind me and make me watch from a cage instead." Kayla's expression flickered. Pain, confusion, perhaps even a trace of pity. But it hardened again. "You weren't the one in chains." I know, Martin said. That's why I left the camera. That's why I told one of the guards to ignore it. I hoped it would get found. I hoped your dad would find it. I knew he never stopped searching. He didn't, she said softer now. He never stopped. I didn't expect it to work, Martin admitted. But when I saw him at the charity event, when he showed up at the booth, I panicked. I knew it had begun, that everything was finally unraveling. Kayla stared at him. Do you regret it? Any of it? Every second, he said. But I don't expect forgiveness. Not from you. I don't even think I deserve to speak your name. She sat back, arms folded. I didn't come here to forgive you. I came here because I needed to say one thing to your face. Martin's gaze steadied. What is it? I'm still here, she said. Despite everything. Despite you. I'm still here. I survived what you let happen. And I'm going to rebuild my life, piece by piece, without your shadow touching it again. Martin's eyes glistened, but he didn't speak. I'll never be who I was, Kayla continued. None of us will. But we're still breathing. And you, her voice tightened, you don't get to decide what that means. A knock came at the door. The 10 minutes were almost up. Kayla stood. Martin didn't move. You saved me, she said. But you also let me drown. And I'm not going to carry your guilt anymore. With that, she turned and walked to the door. She didn't look back. Not even when the guard opened it. Not even when Martin's voice came, small and hoarse, behind her. I'm sorry. Outside the room, the counselor waited. Kayla emerged, her face pale, her hands clenched. The counselor opened her arms gently, and for the first time since her return, Kayla allowed herself to lean into someone. To release. It's over, she whispered. It's really over. No, the counselor said quietly. It's just beginning. That evening, back at the hospital, Thomas waited as Kayla returned. She looked exhausted but calmer, a quiet determination in her step. How to go, he asked, his voice low. She sat beside him and leaned her head on his shoulder. I said what I needed to say. And did he listen? She nodded once. Yeah, I think he did. Together, they watched the sky grow dark, the soft whir of medical machines marking time. In the distance, another storm approached the Oregon coast, dark clouds gathering over the sea. But inside the room, there was stillness. There was breath. There was light. Kayla closed her eyes. She didn't need to dive anymore to find silence. She had faced the current, and she had made it back. 3 months later, the Pacific stretched out in a sheet of glass beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at for long. The waves were gentle that morning off the coast of Lincoln Cove, a far cry from the chaos and darkness that had once filled these waters. Thomas Granger stood on the deck of the Tide Seeker, his legs still wrapped in a brace, though he could move without the cane now. He breathed in the salt air, crisp and cold, and let it settle deep in his lungs. The harbor behind him was waking up, fishermen shouting greetings, gulls circling above, the scent of diesel and brine mingling in the breeze. Below deck, Kayla was checking the equipment. She moved with the ease of someone who had spent her life in the water, though the trauma still lingered in the slight hesitations of her hands. When she emerged into the sunlight, she was wearing her old swim cap, the one with the initials KG stitched near the base. She hadn't worn it in years. Thomas turned and gave her a long, quiet look. You sure about this? She nodded. I have to try. For myself. We can turn back any time. She smiled faintly. Then we won't have to. They motored out toward Breaker's Point, past the buoy where the GoPro had been found. It had since been recovered, cleaned, and mounted in a display case in the harbor's rescue center, now a memorial to the girls who didn't make it out. Kayla had attended the ceremony, standing silent beside the families of the missing. She didn't speak that day, but her presence said more than words could have. Now, as the buoy bobbed beside them, she reached out and brushed its rusted edge with her fingers. "It's still here," she murmured. "So am I," Thomas replied. She dove into the water. The cold hit her like a slap, but she welcomed it. She let herself float, then began swimming, slow, measured strokes. She traced the same route she had swum every morning for years before the world fell apart. Her body remembered the rhythm, even if her mind still flinched at sudden sounds or shadows in the deep. Thomas followed alongside in the boat, just as he had back then. He didn't call out. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched her move through the water with the grace of someone claiming back something that had been stolen. An hour later, she climbed back aboard, breathless, cheeks flushed, eyes shining with salt and something deeper, pride. "You did it," he said, handing her a towel. "I did," she said, wrapping herself in it. "Not for anyone else. Just for me." They sat on the deck in silence, letting the sun dry their skin. Around them, the sea sparkled. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked suddenly. "Sometimes," Thomas replied. "But it's home, even with everything." "I think I want to stay," Kayla said. "Not forever, but for now. There's something about this town. It still believes in starting over." Thomas nodded. "And we're proof that you can." In the weeks since the confrontation, Kayla had started speaking publicly, first to the survivors, then to the press. She shared her story not as a symbol, but as a survivor. She testified before a congressional panel on athlete safety. She worked with advocacy groups to establish new protection programs. Her voice, once buried beneath fear, now carried the weight of truth and strength. And Thomas, for the first time in years, had begun sleeping through the night. He'd sold his diving company, though he still kept the Tide Seeker. Some habits refused to be broken. One morning, Kayla found him on the dock with a group of teens, teaching them how to check air tanks and measure depths. "Thought you were done diving," she teased. He grinned. "Not done teaching. These kids remind me why I fell in love with the ocean in the first place." She watched him a moment longer, then picked up a pair of goggles and joined them. Not all healing happens in silence. Sometimes it happens with laughter, with second chances, with the act of returning to the water and finding, against all odds, that you still know how to swim. That night, after dinner, they sat on the porch of their small coastal house, listening to the wind push against the pines. Kayla held a cup of tea, her legs tucked beneath her, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think it'll ever feel normal again?" "No," Thomas said truthfully. "But maybe it'll feel new." She smiled at that. "New doesn't sound so bad." "It doesn't," he agreed. The moon rose over the ocean, casting a silver path across the waves. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, there were others still searching for answers, for hope, for lost daughters or redemption. But here, in this quiet moment, a father and daughter had found each other. They had swum through darkness, faced monsters, and surfaced into light. The scars remained, visible and invisible, but they were not the end of the story. They were the beginning of a new one. As the stars blinked awake above the Pacific, Kayla whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." Thomas looked at her and said, "Neither am I." And they sat there together, as the sea breathed and the world, at last, felt wide open again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life inspired mysteries and powerful journeys. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. And if you believe in second chances, in strength through darkness, or simply want to send a prayer for all the missing souls out there, type "God bless" in the comments below. Let's keep the light alive.